Welcome, Cassie.
Thanks so much, Tia. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. I hope that for everyone listening, if they haven't read your book after this happier hour, it's gonna motivate them to do so. So just super excited for my audience to learn from you.
Awesome. Yeah, I hope they read it too, because hopefully it will help them be happier and spend their
Yes,
time with greater intention and then experience more joy. That's
yes, intention. So I'm going to start off by sharing that I believe, and this is with all my communications leaders and people I work with, and friends and family members, that it feels like 99% of people in North America that I communicate with feel time poor.
yes.
Would you agree with that?
Well, so I have empirical data to suggest that. And what you mean by time poor, which, it's this term that we use in the literature, that everyone knows exactly what it means, but it is defined as the acute feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it. And we actually conducted a survey among a nationally representative sample of Americans to see, in fact, how many people and who feels this way. And what we found that is that 47%, nearly half of Americans
Yeah.
feel time poor. And I know you're like 99%, but you're talking to a particular subset. But
Yes.
even so, and that's including folks who are retired, that's including, you know, um,
Right.
folks who aren't working for pay. And nevertheless, almost half feel this way. And it's interesting to see who's more likely to feel this way. We see that even though actually men or women are more likely to feel time poor than men, and
Yeah.
working parents, particularly when your partner is working too,
Yes.
feel particularly sort of temporally impoverished. But
Yes.
what's interesting in our data is that we saw that all types of people, even those who are not working for pay and those who don't have kids, also feel this way. So it is a very prevalent issue.
Yes.
Um, and we can talk about the fact that it is in fact an issue and a problem, because that has all these really negative consequences that we see in the data. And
Yes.
for anyone who is experiencing this knows firsthand how it can have a negative effect on our lives.
Yes. It's interesting when you say the two working parents, because my husband and I both work. We have two kids that are 7 and 9. And I am obviously so grateful to be a woman in 2023 versus a woman in 1945, right? In terms of how far. And I also have said, having it where it was these defined roles and women just did this, and, not all women, of course, in 1945, but that not, I don't know if clashing is the right word, but, both of us are doing everything. And it is complicated. It is complicated.
It is complicated and it's hard. And you look at what are the effects of feeling this way, being time poor. And it's like it's coming from, yes, work pressures, but also, like wanting to be a good partner, wanting to be a good
A good
parent, wanting to be a
parent.
good friend, all those chores. So it is stuff, and a lot of it is stuff that we really want to do. We like it's so
Yes.
wonderful that we have the opportunity to work, and for so many of us in jobs that are really purposeful and fulfilling. Nevertheless, as we're rushing through our days, feeling like we don't have enough time to get everything done, it feels stressful. And we find this in our data. We analyze data from the American Time Use Survey, looking at how people spent their days. And what we found was that those who had less than 2 hours of discretionary time within their days, they were significantly less happy. They were less satisfied in their lives. And that's driven by heightened feelings of stress.
Hmm.
So we feel it emotionally. You also see that when people feel time poor, they're less healthy, right? People exercise less.
Yeah.
They delay going to the doctor when they're sick. They're more likely to eat fast and unhealthy food because it's faster. You also see it play out in affecting how we interact with others. When we feel like we're in a rush, we're less likely to slow down and help others out. It makes us less confident in being able to achieve all what we set out to do. So it is bad, right?
Yes.
What's interesting though is that like in those moments and those days, which are so many, where we are rushing around, it's like, oh my gosh, if only I had more time.
Yes.
We need to be careful of what we wish for, because also in our analysis of the American Time Use Survey data, we saw that those with less than approximately 2 hours of discretionary time in their day were less happy. But interestingly, we also saw that those with more than approximately 5 hours of discretionary time in their days were less happy.
I loved that slide. Yes. And I've shared that because everybody thinks if they're on a tropical island drinking a pina colada all day, listening to the late Jimmy Buffett music, way happier. So that's really valuable. It's like, no, it's not 12 hours of free time.
Yeah. And it is important to go on vacation and on weekends to sort of carve out time that, whether you're actually at the beach listening to Jimmy Buffett or sort of in your mind, like relaxing. But day in and day out, when you're spending your time with nothing to show for it, then we see this negative effect. And it's driven by the too much time effect. It's driven by a lacking sense of purpose, right? That we want to feel somewhat productive in how we spend our time. But we don't want to have such a little amount of time that we don't feel that we can slow down and actually soak up and experience the time that we're spending, that we're not just rushing past and through everything, which has that stress. It makes us sort of more reactive as opposed to proactive. As leaders, or as we're sort of thinking about our companies and just even sort of in your own personal, professional work, when you are just reacting, you aren't carving out and don't have that space to be really strategic and to think big and optimistically. And so this time poverty is absolutely something that we need to address, so that, because what it does is it lessens us, right? It limits us, both sort of in the activities that we do, but also how we engage in those activities. And so we don't want to be limited by this resource of time. So then the question is, how do we invest our time so that we aren't limited and we're actually sort of living out the good stuff, like our full potential, and having joy along the way?
Yes. So one question before we move on about 2 hours of discretionary time. When you are with your children, because I definitely feel like my husband and I are like, it's work and it's children, and we do date nights and we do, invest in our relationship too. But the whole, like the day is like kids, work, kids, right? And being one way, being a good parent, etc. Is time with kids, can time with kids fall under that discretionary, or is discretionary more like, I don't know, you're right, you're like going for a run that you want to, like it's more individual?
Time with kids can absolutely be discretionary. In the data, the way that we did it empirically was we presented, so the American Time Use Survey has like 140 categories of activities. And then what we did, instead of us being like, is it discretionary? So discretionary being something you want to do versus obligatory, something you have to do.
Right.
We didn't want our own judgment to cloud it. So what we did is we presented all the activities to another sample of Americans, and we asked, is this discretionary for each activity? And what we found was that the discretionary activities, there was the relaxing, there was the sort of watching TV, there was socializing. So there was playing sports with kids, But what's interesting, like directly to your question of time with kids, there's absolutely activities that are like very required and not fun.
Right.
Like bath time,
Oh my
like
goodness.
making lunches, all that stuff. And you see that in the data. But playing with your kids, socializing, and however
Having
people
fun
do that,
together.
yeah, is absolutely discretionary. You also see exercise as and playing sports as a source of, or that people view it as discretionary. You also see engaging in interesting hobbies. And the reason I actually am pointing to those as well is because what we did also find was that too much time effect. You don't see the negative drop if you're spending your discretionary time in ways that feel worthwhile. So what we see is that actually, so like for retirees, for instance, when they're spending their hours engaging in a hobby that is enriching and developing, or engaging in social connection, like socializing, you don't actually see the dip. You do see the dip when it's a lot like sort of passive leisure. So watching TV.
Watching TV. Yes. No, sometimes it is nice to just veg, but I definitely, yeah, with TV, you're not like, oh, I gained so much, right? Unless it's an incredible documentary, maybe, or yeah. Okay, let's talk about how extremely challenging it is to be present in an age of distractions every 2 seconds because of our technology, right? Our phones, whether it's texting, it's communication apps that workplaces use, it's social media, it's news, on and on and on of the distractions. And knowing that when you're distracted, you can't get into that state of flow. And it can be distractions while you're working, distractions while you're with your children, distractions while you're with your spouse, even with your friends. Like we're constantly being pulled away. And so I'm wondering what advice, tools you have, because
yes,
I'm holding up my phone for everyone who's driving or running and listening. Yes, I've just
we are distracted a whole lot of the time. There was interesting work where they were looking at sort of just how often we are focusing not on what we're currently doing, but thinking about something else that our mind is wondering. And that work found that we are not thinking about what we're doing almost half of the time. And so actually, it's really important to figure out the answer that I offer for how do we invest our time for greater happiness and fulfillment. One piece of it is to invest in these activities that are more worthwhile and feel fulfilling. But the other really important piece of it is to be paying attention during those activities, particularly the ones that are really worthwhile, particularly when you are doing that work that is totally in line with your purpose that you love so much. And you're like, you can't enter a state of flow when there are these distractions. And you held up your phone because such a source of distraction are our phones. They are so helpful, but they are constantly, even the mere presence of our phones draws our attention out to other things that we could, in some cases feel like should be doing, drawing our attention away from what we're currently doing. Now, there's a few things that you can do. I mean, the very pragmatic and practical one is carving out times that are no phone zones.
Yeah, so, I put phones away rituals.
Yeah. So, and being, it's not like you're never going to use your phone, but for those times that are really important to you, for those hours of work that you really need to think deeply, for the time with your kids, the fun part, not the bath time and, making lunchtime.
Right.
But the fun part is carving it out as a no phone zone so that not only are you more engaged, but if it's a social activity that others are more engaged too. There's a sort of cute study where they had friends dining together And they told half of them to put their phones away out of sight. The other half left their phones on the table. And what they found was that those whose phones were away were significantly happier. They enjoyed the dining experience more because they were more engaged. So no phone zones is helpful, but also recognizing, particularly in those times that you are spending with your kids, with your partner, these are times that, because they're so ordinary, they're so much a part of our daily life, we very much take them for granted. Absolutely. And it's actually sort of a more basic psychological phenomenon is that we get used to stuff. So hedonic adaptation, when you do the same thing again and again, when you're with the same person over and over, you start getting used to that. And you stop noticing quite so much. Now, it's really good that we adapt in the face of negative circumstances because it makes us more resilient, that it makes us adapt and sort of be okay over time. But it's bad that we adapt and stop noticing the good stuff. Yeah. Right. And so how do we offset hedonic adaptation so that for the good stuff, we continue to notice, so that we continue to sort of feel the joy that's right there in that time, potentially in that time we're spending. There are several sort of strategies I share in Happier Hour to help people in this. One is to turn your routine into rituals. So our routine.
Yes, I love this story when I heard you talk. Yes.
Yeah. Our routines are super helpful because it's like a routine is just that. You do it over and over and you don't have to think about it. But there are things that we do want to continue thinking about. And so if you turn something, and this is just a framing, if you turn a routine into a ritual, that makes it more special. So, and you can even give it a name, like, you know, if you go out for dinner with your husband or your partner every Friday night, call it date night, right? Call it a date. Or if you're, and for a ritual that I share, which continues to sort of bring such joy, is my weekly coffee date with my daughter. And this is something we started when she was really little. And I would have to drop her off on Thursdays at her preschool on my way into the office. And we would stop at the local coffee shop because I needed caffeine. I see you're drinking probably coffee right now. But what we did was, instead of it being routine, we turned this into our Thursday morning coffee dates. It has this name. We have our playlist that we turn on every time we're going. She gets her hot chocolate. I get my flat white. We have croissants. And this is 30 minutes still, years later, each week that we spend together. And this, by recognizing that, like, sort of making it special, that, you know, this is our thing, we continue to pay attention. Another strategy is actually recognizing that even though it does seem every day, it's not going to continue happening every day.
Yes, I definitely think about that often, of like, you never know if tomorrow you're going to, hopefully not, but you could get hit by a bus. You could get a diagnosis. You could, you know, I think it's, crucial to keep that.
And even sort of less severe than that is recognizing that, you know, my daughter's 7 now. When she's 12, she's probably going to want to go to the coffee shop with her friends instead of me. Yeah. Then she's going to go off to college. And so what is so regular and available and weekly, you know, a weekly thing now isn't going to continue happening each week, and certainly not the way that it does now. I share this exercise of counting times left, where you count how many times are you actually likely going to do this activity in the same way that you do it now, in this way that you love so much. And then you also count how many times you've done it in your life overall, so you can see what proportion of your time do you have left. More often than not, it's significantly less than we expect. Yes. I calculated for coffee dates, my coffee dates with my daughter, we have 36% of our coffee dates left. And she's only 7 years old. And that alone, that recognition of like, oh, this time is limited. This time is something that I need to pay attention to. My mind should not be like, my eyeballs should not be on my phone. My mind should not be wandering to, my constant, that to-do list of like, what's next? What should I be planning for? Recognizing that in fact, these moments, even though it's just, 30 minutes, are in fact precious. And so it draws the attention to those moments, and helps eliminate the distraction.
So valuable and such important reminders. You talk about designing your ideal week. We could probably have a whole episode just on this, but over the next few minutes, can you give people maybe a framework or some starting points for people to pause, step back, and look at how to actually be very intentional about designing your week?
Yeah. So the important thing, as I said, was there's sort of two parts of how we invest our time. There are spending on activities that are really worthwhile, and then being engaged during those activities. But to identify what are those ways of spending that are the best for you, that are in fact worthwhile. And I do encourage people to track their time. So in research, what we do is we see what activities are people doing, how are they feeling, so we can pull out on average what are those activities that are associated with the most positive emotion, the most satisfaction, what are those activities that are associated with the most negative emotion. But you should track your own time, because you want to see, and there's a very easy worksheet on my website and instructions in the book for how to do this. But over the course of a week, write down for each 30 minutes, like what activity are you doing? And as importantly, when you come out of that activity, rating it on how you feel. And while sort of tedious to track your time, is super important and helpful, because at the end of the week, you have this fantastic personalized data set that you can look across and be like, okay, what are those activities that got my highest ratings? Sometimes it is those really sort of simple, sweet activities like with your kids. But also there's those like parts of your workday that are like, oh my gosh, that was really fun. And then you can dig in and be like, okay, what's the underlying sort of commonality across these activities? Why is it that some of these work activities are so positive, whereas others get very low ratings? So that you can be like, okay, given that information, these really worthwhile ones, and sometimes it's because those work activities feel like you're making progress, that they're perhaps really connecting with colleagues, perhaps because it is so clearly in line with these sort of, these higher order goals, and making sure that as you're designing your ideal week, is putting those activities into your schedule first, protecting time for them. Because what typically happens is that we sort of are so reactive and are moving through our weeks without having spent time on the stuff that really matters. And so once you put those really important activities into your week, some of them you will also, even like on that sort of schedule, carve out as no phone zones of like, for that deep thinking work, maybe it is, in fact, phone is away, log out of email. But I've actually seen some people sort of put their out of office in their email, for those few hours, so that they're not getting distracted, so that at the end of the week, this is actually really important, because of course, when we, going back to that sense of being time poor, we do have so much, both that we feel like we have to do, but there's so much that we want to do. And the problem is when we're just sort of moving through our weeks, doing things without being proactive and prioritizing and intentional about making time for the good stuff, so that at the end of the week, we can look back and feel like, oh, it was good. Because of course we're going to be busy, but at least if you've invested in the stuff that matters, it doesn't have that negative experience of time poverty, of that overwhelm, the stress of that life is just moving past you. And in fact, life feels full and good and you've invested. And with that greater sense of having spent in these worthwhile ways, it actually gives you energy. Mm-hmm. So it's not depleting. It's not depleting.
That change in language of moving from I am so busy to I am full and it is good.
Yeah.
Is really what we're talking about here, right? It's not like, oh, you're, going on 3-hour walks on, no, right? It's full and you feel good. And I want to also say that in your book, in Cassie's book, I always talk about exercise and happiness. Also, Cassie speaks to when you do exercise in the morning, you feel like you have more time. And there's many other benefits too, but I'm always harping on, move so you're happier. It's also move so you feel like you have more time, which is benefit as well. So, okay, everyone, grab Happy Hour, read it, give it to your teams. Cassie, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
My website, CassieMHolmes.com. And on LinkedIn.
Perfect.
But yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on. And I hope you have a really great day.
Awesome. You too. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.